All right, we are live. Welcome back to the podcast for marketers. For whatever reason, I can't spell or type today. It's probably more typing than spelling. I'm a fairly good spellist, but I am not a good typer. So I don't know.
You're a good spellerator.
Spellerator, yeah.
Yeah.
So welcome to my friend and colleague, and I guess those are the two things primarily, Paul Pavolny. It's good to have you, my friend, and I always enjoy chatting with you. I don't think this is going to be any different unless you keep pointing out my typos. And in which case,
man.
There's just no guarantee how things end at that point.
Yeah. What's even funnier is you corrected it, and it's still a different thing. It's just a different version of what it was.
Right.
But hey, you know what? Podcasts could become a thing. So
they could. But
I just leave it and just see if you can start a trend.
What I don't think is that Podaxed are going to catch on, which is how I originally had it spelled.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's one of those things where my brain is talking and my fingers are like, yeah, we'll get to that later. Yeah.
Right. And then you'll look at it 50 times and never see the obvious
that's
typo.
The weirdest part.
Yeah.
And one of the things that my fingers habitually do is instead of marketers, it's marketers. So yeah, it's really these guys. These same guys that were trained as artists, they just don't like typing.
That's why I use all my fingers to type. That's why I hunt and peck. It's a little safer that way, but I still mess things up. Like I still always like capitalize E's after letters and stuff. Like it's random stuff, and I never spell there right. It's always I flip the E and the I, but that's life.
Oh yeah, we have a so I used to live off of a street called Matherfield in Sacramento area. And when I first met my wife, she likes to, as the English say, take the piss. And it's really funny because she's such a quiet, unassuming, demure woman, right? But if she decides she's going to knock you down a peg, it's brutal. So one time, in written form, I said Matherfield instead of field. I didn't stop living that down until about 2 years ago. I finally.
Don't worry, it'll come up again. It'll come up again.
Oh yeah. No, it's that's her jam. It's like knocking me down a peg. So anyway,
it keeps you humble.
It does. And
because you have a lot to be proud of. So, somebody's got to do it.
Somebody's got to. It's perspective. We are here today to talk about really whatever comes up. But what I thought I'd like to talk about with you, because I know that we share a lot of overlapping views on this and stuff, is really I'd like to just dig into the sort of the stuff that we see going on in the internet marketing space. And I want to talk about the effed up stuff, the darks, the black hat, the gray areas.
Sure.
And just kind of get your 2 cents on it, because you come from a more disciplined corporate background, right? Like you didn't just decide one day after buying a Sam Ovens course or whatever that you were going to be a branding guy.
No, I've done this my entire career, 30 years. Yeah.
Yeah. And so just as an entree point.
By the way, congrats on the podcast, man. Before we jump into that, congrats on the podcast.
Thank you.
That's pretty exciting. And I'm glad you're doing this, and it's going to be awesome.
Well, I appreciate that. And actually that tees up a little marketing and branding lesson for people listening. Without knowing it, when I first came into this space, the very abbreviated version of the story goes like this. I met my wife, and I have had just a really crazy childhood and young life, and even like into my adult life, and so one of the things that I habitually got good at doing was just glibly sharing these incredible horror stories for like shock and awe appeal and to show off and it would always work. And then I met her, and this isn't going to be all about you, honey, if you're listening, which she will listen. But it's just so interesting because the first thing was I had to go through a long, long process of unlearning the behaviors and the ways of thinking that attracted me to the kinds of women I would be attracted to before. And so the woman that I'm with now represents probably the first time I really attracted a different kind of partner, which in a way was really cool because that means that I've grown and changed. But the stuff that was weird about it was none of my tricks worked. You know what I mean? So one day I'm telling her just this god awful story. I don't even remember which one it was, but like there's a lot of violence and drug abuse in my past and stuff like that. And so I just casually, talk about, I don't know, something awful and horrific. And where other women would, the ones that I always pursued would be, oh, that's so incredible. And, she just looked at me, man. She just stopped what she was doing and looked at me. And she just said, you have to write this down.
Yeah.
She's like, you have to write this down. And I didn't know how to handle that. And so I went through this whole thing of like, well, I always thought I'd write a book, but I'm not successful. And she said something to me that really has been important. It's really been important. And it speaks to perspective, and it speaks to how easy it can be for us to lose perspective on ourselves. So I said to her, well, I always thought I'd write a book, but I'm not successful, et cetera, et cetera. And she she acted like she was punched in the stomach. And she said, just the fact that you're trying every day to be a good dad, just the fact that you're sober, just the fact that you're here, grinding through what you're doing is a kind of success. Right. And and now I'm going to like gratuitously connect this to the world of coaching and marketing, but with value. The point here being, we are not the best arbiters of what our success is. Right. Because we hold ourselves to these crazy standards and we sort of narrow the parameters over time without all these things. And when she said that really affected me. Yeah. To the point that I went home that night and started writing.
Wow.
And 9 months later, I had a full manuscript, which was the story of my life. And the question then became, what do I do with this? I was a complete relic in terms of what I thought you did. I thought you then sent your manuscript out to every publishing house. And you got, like in the rom-com montages, after 100 rejections, you get the one. And Now somehow I landed a 15-minute call with a VP from Penguin. And I don't know how I even did it, but this guy was very generous. And he said, you have to build a platform. So that leads to the first podcast. Yeah. So I had this book. I was very excited about it. Didn't know anything about a platform. He said, start a podcast. That's a great way to grow an audience. And so I started a podcast at that time called The Steep Side of the Mountain, Lessons from an Unmentored Life. And it was really kind of cool, man, because it was like this cult thing. And now obviously there's a double entendre there. We'll get to in a minute. But what I mean is, amongst other podcasters and amongst coaches, it was revered. Like it was revered. It never got widespread appeal. So, it was sort of like Vince Vaughn and Jon Favreau in Swingers versus them now. All that is to say, I have experience doing a podcast, and it was really, here's another marketing lesson for those of you listening. I didn't know it at the time, but it was a profound personal brand building process. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, just tremendous. And I still, 10 years later, most people, if they Google their name, they don't dominate the first 10 pages of search results. I do. Right. And it was primarily because of the book, the podcast, and then being on other people's shows. And so just a little tip for you guys, do interviews. Do them when you can, because it is really good for your long-term sort of brand cachet. Right. But yeah, this one represents, I think as good as I am, which is, I don't know how good I am at this, but as to the extent that I'm good at reading the tea leaves and the terrain of what's coming, I think that we are truly in the era of the personal brand now in a way that we weren't even 2 years ago. Right. And it's interesting, and I think we covered this when I was on your show, how Alex Hormozy even came out publicly and said that short form is dying,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so if you're a marketer, if you're a coach, whatever, and you're listening to this, you'll probably know who that is. He kind of made short form, like hyperactive ADHD videos the thing. And so
Right.
everybody rushed to do them. And now he comes out and says, oh, yeah, well, now it's, now their efficacy is plummeting.
Now that he's milked that, he's on to the
Yeah.
next thing. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Which is
Yeah.
another marketing lesson for you guys. By the time the gurus at the top are telling you what to do, they've already milked most of the value out of it. And that is one of the many tricks. Wow, this segued nicely into that is one of the many tricks of this space. And so what I'm wondering, Paul, is from your perspective as someone who knows this space, but also knows the more formal, and in my imagination, at least the more disciplined kind of corporate environment, did you see any inklings of the same kind of, like, I'll just call it shady behavior that we have in this space back in those days?
I think there's always been a level of shadiness when it comes to sales and marketing. I mean, we had snake oil salesmen, right?
Literally,
in the old West,
right?
in the old West, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, anytime there's money and the exchange of money involved, there's the people that will manipulate and be deceptive about it, right? And so I don't think it's a new thing. I think we have new tools and new forms that we do it in. But anytime there's money involved, there's the potential of greed. Anytime there's greed, there's deception and manipulation. And so I think just the tools have changed. And some stuff honestly is just the same dog, different haircut. Like it's really the same stuff that has been used for a long time. It's just given new names, and even the secrets, like we see these gurus come out with the secrets, and it's basically, well, you just basically stole everything from somebody else
who
and gave it a different name.
Exactly.
And gave it a different name, repackaged it, curated it, kind of pulled in from all these resources, called it a secret and made it yours. But actually it's stuff that people in the industry have been using for a long time. Now there's new stuff and there's new ways of doing it, new psychology, new understanding. And as culture changes, as people change, as all of that changes, then you have to adapt some things to that. But there's, people are people of all, there's not a whole lot at the core that has changed. And so we just kind of are learning more about it and how to understand it. And by understanding it, then we can use it well or manipulate it as well.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. Now, I do suspect that because the barrier to entry to become a successful marketer, well, forget successful for a minute, because the reality there is this work, to do it well, is hard. It's not unskilled labor, right? But that having been said, the barrier to entry plummeted with the advent of social media. It went from, I would say, if you were in, and this is a guess because I didn't go through this process. For me, I studied marketing and advertising in college, took a long time not doing it because circumstances, and just being behind the eight ball, and then came back to it in the form of learning it for social media and online. But in the old days, you'd have to be a good student in a marketing program to even get an internship. Much less get your foot in the door, right? They wanted a degree, they wanted a portfolio, and that barrier to entry is just gone. Somebody put, like Wile E. Coyote put an Acme Dynamite kit at the bottom of it, and it is there no more, right? And so what we see are the Pink Floyd lyric always comes to mind from the album Animals. And the lyric goes, "Wave upon wave of demented Avengers marched cheerfully out of obscurity into a dream."
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
That is amazing, man. And that's what I see here,
Yeah. Well, I think with every new technology, that's true. I think with the, before the printing press, to get your ideas out there, you had to find a platform in the town square. Here's what I want to say, and then the printing press gets invented. And so certain people had access, but then as that technology became more accessible by people, more people could use it for propaganda, for teaching,
for whatever,
for learning, for whatever, right? And so so the barrier of entry was a little easier, but still not super easy. And so with every new technology that happens, and so I think with social media and with technology where it is now, I mean, it is, everybody has equal access. Now, of course, you can get broader access because advertising and promoting and boosting and all that stuff gets you further access. But like the barrier of entry now is near zero. Where
you
in
just
the past,
need that Sam Evans course, right?
right. But now most of us have phones. It's rare for anybody to not have a phone, and that is all you need. And so while the entry is $1,000 or whatever the newest phone is, but most of us have to have it anyway. And so we all now have access to be in front of people like we never have before. And so understanding how to use that properly is definitely worth it. Like, you were talking about, to be a part of the agency world, you needed to have an agency education. Now you can get some pretty amazing teaching from coaches and, free stuff online or paid courses or whatever. And to get access to people, it's anybody can do it. Whereas even 50 years ago, it was, if you want to get people's attention, be in the papers, or be on television, whereas now you don't need any of those traditional things anymore. It's you have a phone and you can get access to an international audience.
So you bring up an interesting point that maybe actually puts me on the wrong side of the whole premise of this podcast, which is that marketing is bullshit. First of all, let me just say,
sorry, man. Well, it's a podcast. It's a podcast, so it's
podcast. So it's not even a podcast. We can make up the rules as we go along here. But here's the thing. The printing press was a great example, right? Because the printing press first came out, there was a huge response to it, both from the public and from the authority, like the church, basically.
Right. Yeah.
And then little by little, it kind of like the sine wave went from this to this, and now it's just publishing is just something we take for granted. Right. I think that social media is too new still, even after 20 years or whatever, for us to say conclusively that it isn't going to follow that same kind of like settling in.
Yeah.
And so, yes, the barrier to entry to call yourself a coach or a marketer or an ads person or anything you want pretty much was obliterated. And I like to use the examples of, I had somebody approach me once for, to help them with their business. And I said, what do you do? And they said they were a happiness coach. And I kind of said, well, as politely as I could, good luck with that. Because that's going to be a tough sell.
Yeah.
And then I had another person tell me that, I said, what do you do? And I don't remember the context of it. All I remember is what they said they did. And they said they coached middle and high school aged kids on embodiment from a trauma-informed perspective. And with a straight face, I said, what does that mean?
Right. Yeah.
And they couldn't answer. They just kept repeating the buzzwords.
Right.
Well, it's like about being embodied.
GPT wrote that. Yeah.
Yeah. And there again, well, I wish you the best of luck. I don't see anybody buying that,
Yeah. Well, and I think you're right. Go ahead. Yeah. I'll let you finish your thought.
Okay. Yeah. What I'm seeing, with this death of short form content and emergence of the era of the personal brand, in spite of the way I show up online, I'm actually deeply optimistic about humanity. And I legitimately don't know if people know that, Because I also really like to be the guy that calls it. And I really like, being a provocateur. It is part of who I am, but I'm also deeply optimistic. And so there's a lot of talk right now today in the marketing and coaching space about the market sophistication hitting its peak and, the new things you have to do in order to sell high ticket stuff, and all of these things I think are they have a significant kernel of truth in them. But what I think they are is that kind of going from crazy to more balanced out, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think you're right in what you call balanced out. I think it's more of a it gets into a hum of like it's everybody screaming in a stadium, and there's
Yeah.
no distinction. There's no it's just a hum of so the printing press came out, suddenly the Bible was accessible to the world. It used to be monitored and controlled by the church, and suddenly everybody now had access to a Bible. And then that,
Yeah.
of course, became other things published as well. And then you're right, it kind of became saturated to where it was a hum and nothing really stood
Yeah.
out. And so, occasionally books would come out that would like radically impact culture because they were so different, they were so interesting, they were so radical in their thoughts and ideas. And so I think even with social media, yeah, I think because everybody, like we said, billions of cell phones, everybody can create content, that there is kind of a hum or a stadium type noise where it almost becomes a white noise.
Yeah.
But even in that white noise, if you hear a distinct sound, that you still pay attention. Like what is that sound in the noise that has got my attention?
Right.
And so I think there is opportunity for people to still get attention and get noticed and share their stories, share their views, share their ideas, share their products, their solutions, whatever. But they've got to have a distinct sound. They've got to have something that makes it very clear what makes them different.
Yeah.
And so even with the examples that you shared, how they talked about themselves wasn't enough for it not to be part of the white noise. There wasn't enough distinction. There wasn't enough clarity in what that means, that people would say, oh, I want to listen to that because that's relevant to where I'm at. And it kind of reminds me of one of my first podcast guests was Keith Thibodeau, who played Little Ricky on I Love Lucy. And he shared the story about, he was a drummer, but when he went and met Desi and Lucy on set, Lucy said to him, hey, you're cute, but what else do you do?
Yeah.
And so then he went to the drum set and started playing drums, and they're like, this is perfect. And Desi started jamming with him and all this. And so it's like, okay, so that's cool, but what else do you do? And I think we're kind of in that culture of, you're a human, that's cool, but what else you do? Why do I need to listen to you above the white noise? Right. And until you get clear on that with your brand and with your marketing of what exactly do you do that makes you different, if you don't do that, you're part of the white noise and nobody's going to notice you.
100%. And now I'm curious to get your take on what you think is the most, I'm going to say has the most utility for people in terms of, here's what happens when people confront that question of like, how do I stand out? Right? From what I can see, the vast majority, and I'm talking 98, 99% of people trying here, completely miss the thing that actually works the best. But I'm going to hold back for a second and just get from you, like, what do you think it is? Like, what's the X factor, secret sauce to standing out?
Well, I think there's incredible value in niching. I think there's value in that. Is to find who are you best equipped to serve, and what problem do you solve for them. I don't know whether I fully agree with Alex Hormozi on short form video is dead. I think it's going to live on because not everybody has, Joe Rogan time to listen to a 4-hour podcast, right? And so even he cuts his stuff up into short segments. And so consuming, I want to figure out how to fix something. I will find a short form video. I had an issue with my car a few weeks ago, and I was trying to figure out how to solve this problem. And I'd go to YouTube, and on YouTube, guys would just start talking, and I think they like the sound of their own voice. And I'm like, okay, just like get to it. Like, what does that light on my dashboard mean, and where do I go to fix it? And so I think there is still a place for short form if it solves problems, if it entertains, if it gets right to the point. I think it's not dead quite as much as maybe Alex might be saying. I think there's room for both.
Yeah, yeah,
But I think definitely, with going back to your original question, is, you know, getting clear on what do you solve, what do you answer, what entertainment do you bring, what education do you bring, what solutions do you bring, and who do you bring it to, and getting clear on that, and then getting it in front of those people is pretty important. And so I think that's where the key is, to having that shorter form content, and getting it in front of the right audience.
I think that I don't think short form content will die. I don't think any style of, well, okay, until there is another like sea change in delivery, like it went from books and TV to social media, which is 24/7, and now it's VR, AR is probably the next horizon. But whatever it is, until there is a sea change in how it's delivered, I think there's always going to be value. And if we were to get real nerdy and technical, I would say short form probably will function for a long time as great top of funnel, But then
Yeah.
here's the thing that I would add or suggest or whatever is, yeah, it's fine to make short form content. In fact, I did that. I did it before Alex Hormozy did it. I just didn't do it to the
Well, I think he
level
probably
he
got
did.
the idea from you.
I
I
would
don't
say
know.
so.
That's
I mean,
word on the street, but
it's
yeah.
pretty typical. Yeah. But his real genius in terms of the short form stuff, there were two pieces that he innovated on. One was the captions and the little sort of ADHD attention catching. That was genius.
Yeah.
And then
Which he
the
moved
other,
away from. Yeah.
yeah. Well, it got saturated, right? Because
Yeah.
tactics. So for you guys listening at home, tactics die.
Right.
Principles don't die, and strategies have a longer lifespan, but tactics die.
Yeah.
And
I would say
so
gimmicks die. Yeah.
gimmicks die. Yeah. The other thing that he did that was genius was he just ramped it up to some insane level with his boosting. Right.
Yeah.
So I heard he was spending $100,000 a month on boosting. I don't know, but here's what I do know. He went with a true omnipresent strategy.
Right.
And he capitalized on the mere exposure effect, which is, if I keep seeing you over and over again, I start trusting you.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's that kind of thing. Now, where was I going with this? The thing that I've seen people make a lot of the same mistake over and over again on with short form is it's hard to come up with ideas. So you just talk about anything.
Yeah.
Right. Now there's a plus and a minus to that, a pro and a con. Pro is you're creating lots of content. And yes, anybody I'm going off on 10 directions at once, but every now and then I'll see these advertisements for people who are claiming you can grow your business without creating content. And I'm like, yeah, it's kind of like you can run a race without feet.
Right.
Somebody's got to make content for you. It's just, there's no way around it. But the thing is one of the rules of a personal brand, which is what you're creating with content, guys, in case you don't know that, is you need to keep it focused.
Yeah.
If I shared every single thing I'm interested in, I would seem schizophrenic. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I keep it down to a few things. But what I was wondering your take on is, in terms of overall efficacy of a content strategy, where do you place the personality part and where do you place the expertise part? Like, which one weighs more heavily in your opinion?
I don't know whether you can separate them. I think they need to be together, because that's what makes you different, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can have one person share a piece of information. In college, you have, two teachers teach on the same subject. One makes it super interesting. They're able to make it relatable. They're able to make it understandable. They're able to add humor to it. And then you've got the other one who's up there and they're just like a robot and they're just giving you information. And, you're not receiving that as well based on your personality. And so it's both in the person sharing the information, but it's also in the person receiving the information. They react to different types of learning and different types of content. And so I think, combining your personality with the information, I think is part of your brand, part of your personal brand. And so I would find a way to do both of that. And, going back to what you said is, what problem are you solving? Be very clear on that. Here's what I'm doing. I am educating you around this area, or I'm giving you information around this area, or I'm just entertaining you, but kind of be clear on what your goal is and what it is that you're doing. And then, put that out there and don't just ramble. I mean, rambling that's just a waste of energy and time. For content strategy is get very clear as who you're helping and what are you helping them with, and creating content around that.
I agree. And I feel that at the end of the day, it's a formula. So if you have all value with no personality, the person who has more personality but also establishes their value is going to tend to lap you every time. And I have my thought process on this, and I hope I'm right because I've been teaching this for 5 years. It's never failed me, but here's my thought process. Until we know what distinguishes you, we compare you on features and prices, right? Yeah. Price and features. And when you put your personality into the mix, that's when you sort of are able to scoot yourself forward from the faceless crowd of other people who do what you do. One of the things to keep in mind, if you're listening at home, is no matter what you do, there's really only one of two kind of outcomes in over 99% of situations. One is there are going to be a lot of other people who do what you do.
Yeah.
The other is there aren't. If there aren't, you have a whole host of challenges ahead of you because you're blazing new trails and you may not even have a viable service like the happiness coach, right? Or the trauma-informed perspective coach, or, those things are, there is such a thing as niching too far, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yes and no. If you've got to make sure that there's a minimal viable audience,
right,
that can support you in that niche. Now, if there's 3 people in the world that do that and none of them are billionaires, then you're probably niching too far. But if there's enough people within that demographic who can actually pay for your solution, then it doesn't have to be more than 100 or 1,000 if they've got the money.
Yeah. That's right.
And so, but the other thing I want to kind of go back to the talking about the type of content and being just informational with no personality. There are some people that receive that and they can learn that way. But here's the thing that you need to think about is if that's what you're doing, do you know who you're competing with? AI.
Oh,
because AI will give you information.
Yeah.
And as AI gets better, I mean, right now, AI kind of gives you an average answer. Like it takes the average of all the knowledge and kind of gives you an average answer. And so it doesn't give you anything Seth Godin level. It doesn't give you anything profound. It's like it takes the average of all the information and kind of puts it in a way that makes sense.
Yeah.
But if all you're doing is giving information, AI is already at a place and getting better at it in generating artificial people as well.
Yeah.
So if you don't have any personality to what you're sharing, and all you're sharing is just information, you are competing with AI at that point.
I hadn't even
that's something
thought
to think
of that.
about.
Yeah. And in case there's any ambiguity out there in the listeners, you don't want to compete with AI at what AI excels at. You are going to get your ass handed to you.
Yeah.
But there's another really important piece there, and I want to attribute it to Seth Godin. I could be wrong, but I think he was the first person I heard talking about minimum viable audience.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we don't think about that in this space very often, because all of the messaging and the pressure and the signal is grow, 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 scale, scale, scale.
Yeah.
You know, if I had a nickel for every person I talked to who said, my mission is to impact 1 million people, I'd have a big pile of nickels, you know. But the likelihood of any of them truly impacting 1 million people is almost zip.
Right.
Like it's a ridiculous self-serving kind of a thing to say, you know.
Yeah.
And so there's that 1,000 raving fans idea.
Right.
And
Right.
that's
Well, then when you're reaching for 1 million, you're also within that million, there's 1 million personalities, you know, 1 million variables that 1 million other people could be reaching for, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, when it's that broad, there's no way 1 million people are all the same. But when you niche down to that 100 or to that 1,000, you know, there's a greater chance that they're very, very similar. And if they're enough similar and you have the right problem that you're solving for them, then you can have a very much a profitable business even within that space.
Yeah, totally. So originally I really wanted to talk about the, you know, the seedy underbelly, but we are into nice conversation territory here. Why do you think, and you've talked about this a little bit, but I'd like to get a little deeper into it. Why do you think this space seems to be such a magnet for people who, at the very least, score high in the dark triad, which has now been updated, by the way, to the dark tetrad, but we're not going to go into that. But I mean, this is one where I want to say what I think, but I have to hold back as a host and hear what the guest thinks. What are your thoughts on that?
Why people, mischievous people are attracted to the marketing space?
Well, let's define the dark triad a little bit. It's a little beyond mischievous, right? It's
All
people
right.
who score high in Machiavellianism, narcissism, and there's one other, I don't remember what it is. Basically, manipulation and self-serving traits, right?
Yeah.
What do you think? Why? First of all, do you think that in actuality this space is kind of overrun with those people?
I don't know whether it's overrun. I think it's over-influenced.
Oh, that's a good.
You know, and so you know, because there are these people with, you know, they're collecting commas, you know, they're in these, you know, and they see these people with, you know, these elaborate vacations and trips and living remotely and cars, and you know, and all this thing, and so they're influencing people with those things and pulling them in. And I think anything that has a potential of influencing any kind of a role, whether it's marketing, whether it's leading a business, whether it's CEO, whether it's president, whether it's pastor, whether it's whatever kind of a leader that has influence, I think those kind of personalities are drawn to. I think, but like we've talked about, the barrier of entry into this space is easier than some of those others. And so I think there's a more obvious cesspool of that kind of stuff, you know, within this space, because the barrier of entry is so much easier. And but there's those kind of people in all kind of leadership positions. I mean, you know, from the, you know, the 10-person agency to the 100-person corporation to the, you know, 1,000, organization. So I think those people exist in every realm. I just think this is a lot easier to get into.
Yeah, I think it's a lot easier to get into, and I think that the like, it's not just the promise of easy. I say easy. Let's highlight that word for later, you know, scrutiny. But the promise of quick money, right?
Yeah.
That's always, I think, going to draw the people who are, you know, they're not as averse to fudging things in the
Yeah.
name of the end result.
Right.
And then it's interesting too. One of the things that I don't hear people talking about is this space also attracts. So we all, especially if you operate in the online space, you've overheard the word narcissist for sure, right?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is just one of everybody's favorite words to throw around. And
Right.
then people also like to self-identify as empaths. But what is interesting to me is the narcissist and the empath are kind of like the Sith and the Jedi. Like
Yeah.
it's the same, two sides of the same thing, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you look at the coaching space in particular, which by the way, if you're a coach, you have to learn to market. Sorry.
Yeah.
There's just
Yeah.
no way around it. So
Right.
the coaches come in all bright-eyed and full of naive hope and optimism, and they really, I mean, it's that process of you've taken the step of saying, I want to help people with things I've learned through my struggles. And there's
Right.
nobility in that. That is a worthwhile, that thing has worth in and of
Right.
itself.
Right.
Now, because and I include myself in this because this is what happened to me 10 years ago when I stumbled backwards into this space, we tend to make the assumption, whether it's even conscious or not, that because we have been through what we've been through, we have the skills that we have, and we have the desire in our hearts to serve, that's going to mean that 1,000 true fans will beat a path to our door. And then we come in and we realize nothing could be further from the truth, right?
Right. Right. We think that if we build it, they will come, right?
Right, exactly. And I had a colleague once say to me, we all hate marketing. He was being cheeky. He said, we all hate marketing, but the catch is that people demand to be marketed to.
Yeah.
And that hit me like Ali in his prime. I mean, because I struggle with this. You know what I mean? I'm trying to balance ethics and integrity with this art form and this discipline that is inherently easy to use for, negative purposes. And I couldn't agree more. People demand to be marketed to. And so what happens is the coaches come in like, what it reminds me of? Every nature documentary has the scene of the wildebeest crossing the river, right?
Yeah.
And the gator is just waiting. And that's what it's like as far as I can tell. And, people like this, I'm just going to say it, Dean Graziosi, Russell Brunson, Tony Robbins, those people. And I hate to say this about Tony because he influenced me in a positive way when I was young, but I personally feel like he's shifted over time. But that's maybe a different conversation. The point here is when you stand that close to certain types of people, it becomes difficult not to paint you all with the same brush. Right. And like Dean, that guy is an alligator waiting for wildebeests. I'm just going to say it publicly. That the FTC has already, hung him out to dry on more than one occasion. Okay, so whatever. But all of that was to say that I think another contributing factor to all the, I'll just say scammers and people with bad intentions is that there's a super high population of these like well-meaning, naive, sort of like, babe in the woods coaches.
Yeah.
And so that's where we are with that.
When I was getting my newest car, the only one that I had left was a red one. Mm-hmm. And I thought, that's pretty cool. I don't see any red cars on the road. Like, it's going to be awesome. It's going to stand out. My wife loves red. Yeah. And so I thought, this is cool. And so driving home from the dealer, it was crazy. Like, everybody bought a red car, apparently. that day after I bought a red car. Yeah. And so, but that wasn't true. What it changed is my perspective. Suddenly I had a red car and I started seeing red cars. Mm-hmm. And so I think we have to be careful, especially you and I that are in this space, we're deep in this space, is we have seen the dark underbelly of it. Yeah. We see this and we have seen the bad side of it. And I don't think everybody does as much as we think they do. I think there's a lot of people that don't know who Dean is. There are people who have no idea who Russell Brunson is. Tony Robbins has been around long enough that people kind of know who he is. But I think for us, we know these people. We know the people that they've influenced. We know the things that they've done. And so for us, it feels like that is the space, but honestly, it isn't. And there's a lot of coaches and there's a lot of businesses that honestly have there's a lot of agencies, multi-million-dollar agencies that sell millions of dollars worth of products for their clients through marketing that have never heard of Russell Brunson.
Right. Crazy as that sounds to us, right? Yeah,
exactly right. And so for some people, especially it's kind of like we almost have a mental algorithm that feeds us the stuff that we pay attention to, and suddenly it feels like that's everything. But it's like, no, it's the algorithm of our behavior that is feeding us all this content, and we feel that's the world. But outside of that algorithm, there's people that are like, I have no idea who's Dean, like Dean who, Russell who, and for a lot of people, like Russell is a first name basis within the space that you and I have kind of dove head first into. Yeah. But you mentioned Russell outside of that, and they're like, I have no idea who you're talking. Russell who? Yeah. Funnel what? And so I think we've got to be careful about that. I think we can certainly warn people about the alligators in the river. Yeah. But I don't think everybody is crossing the same rivers. And so, they've got to wade in the water. They've got to understand they exist, but they're not as vulnerable to it if they don't let the algorithm capture them, and start diving into that world,
Well, that was a great job taking the metaphor to its reasonable limits. No, man, you're right. And I love what you said about like the mental algorithm. And that makes me want to go off on a whole other tangent, because I am fascinated by the similarity between, just the way that thinking works and algorithms, right? I don't know that widely that it's understood that algorithms really are a mathematical representation of how brains process information and include the biases and stuff like that. And there are plenty of people who have never heard of those guys, which I had a moment one day, this is a few years ago, where I was feeling really like a failure. I was doing my thing, coaching clients, enrolling them, coaching them, helping them, watching them succeed, but I wasn't making $100,000 a month. I think you see where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
And I was just like, God, and it just seemed, back to the red car analogy, like everybody I knew, and when I say I knew, I meant on Facebook, was having $100,000 months. Right. In reality, that was just what I was searching for, filtering for.
Yeah.
And then I kind of go outside and look around my neighborhood, which is, it's not the most prestigious real estate in the world, but it's California upper middle class neighborhood, which by global standards is a pretty high level of living. Right. And I look around and I go, oh yeah, no, none of my neighbors are operating at the level I am. And it was just such like that really stuck with me.
Right. Well, and it's kind of going back to what you started with in talking about your book and talking about, you don't have a rags to riches story yet. Right. And so you felt like, can I even write a book? Like, is my story interesting? Yeah. But you've overcome a lot of things along the way. You've achieved a lot of things along the way. And while you might never get to the rags to riches story, I was on my friend's couch and now I'm making $100,000 a month, or whatever. You might never get to that point, but you've also had an incredible story of overcoming challenges, having battles, keeping on going, getting back up, dusting yourself off. You've had a story of continual faithfulness and continual getting up and, continual getting smashed down and getting back up. And the end of the story might just be that you just lived a good life, you overcame a lot of stuff, and that's it, and so,
Yeah.
even with your story of feeling, I don't have a big dramatic ending. I don't have
Yeah.
an Infinity War
Right.
conquering Thanos type ending. I've just fought a lot of battles along the way, and I'm still standing.
Yeah.
And so I think even with, getting into that world of that marketing ecosystem of funnels and comma clubs and all that stuff, it does make us feel like a failure sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, man, I kind of suck. I'm not doing what they're doing. I'm not collecting these awards and doing all this stuff. But you're also helping people. You're also
Yeah.
serving
Right.
people. You're
Right.
also good to your family, and you provide for
Yeah.
them and all of that stuff. And it's easy to start putting that stuff down as less valuable. But with bigger problem or bigger money comes bigger problems and bigger
Hmm.
demons. And
Yeah.
those people also have challenges that you probably don't want,
Could
that you don't
be.
want
Yeah.
to be at the, sometimes at that level, they're also struggling in other areas that you might not be struggling in. And we don't get to see that all the time.
Right. Yeah. The whole highlight reel thing.
Right.
Now, there was something that you just said that I thought I really wanted to expand upon. It's the perspective piece, right? It's the
Yeah.
perspective piece, which kind of piggybacks off of the whole mental algorithm thing. Because, especially, so for me, working in the online space is the strangest, most surreal space that I've ever worked in. Everything I did before this was conventional by comparison. And you come into this space and it's just a constant bombardment of these, like, obviously fake, I would say, success messages. And one of the things that I figured out, because I spend a lot of my daily allotment of creativity on trying to parse out the mechanics underneath how something as sort of big and multifaceted as the online marketing and coaching space, like how does the group think set in? That's been a question that I chew on a lot. And I think that one of the things that I sort of had an epiphany about at a certain point was, if you take the self-help community, the personal improvement community, because there's a tremendous amount of overlap between that and the marketing and the coaching and the fitness and all of these different things. It's really interesting because those guys and girls, they're constantly projecting these positive messages, right? And yet the positive messages also include this, like, subtext where it's like, you're not here, you're not at this level, so you're kind of not really succeeding,
Right.
which is a
Right.
soft way of saying you're sort of a failure because you're not here with us yet. And you still have the problems that humans experience where we clearly don't anymore.
Right.
So,
Right. At least we don't tell you about it.
and that's what the reality is we just don't
Yeah.
tell you about it. And it can be very hard to sort of peel that onion and get to, like, well, how does this persuasion mechanism keep working? What happens is you get to a point where you start to see through it. And then
Yeah.
when you get to that point, at least for me, the next inevitable question was, how do people keep falling for this?
Because I think it's psychology. I think
Yeah,
it's a desire to get better. I think it's a desire to achieve certain things.
yeah,
And if we see somebody just one step ahead, we want to kind of follow in their footsteps,
yeah,
especially if we feel it's safer, as opposed to me kind of trailblazing. If somebody's a couple of steps ahead of me and they seem to be doing okay, then why not just follow in their footsteps? And so we're kind of drawn to that, I think.
yeah. I think so too.
And so it keeps working on us, especially if there's some
Yeah,
level of, we feel connected to them. We feel that there's somebody that may be a few steps backward, just like us. And so I think we keep getting pulled into it, for those reasons.
I think you're right. And I also think that there are a lot of small contributing influences when something hits a certain like threshold. I don't know if you watched it or not, but if you didn't, I cannot recommend this enough. It is the documentary on the LuLaRoe MLM, and it's called LuLaRich. And so a lot of what happens in this space is patterned off of MLM psychology, right?
Right.
It's not exactly the same, but it's patterned off of it. And that also is patterned off of the original wave of the platform sellers. And what I mean by that is the sell from stage people. But I'm talking back in the day of Earl Nightingale. I'm talking back in the day of Napoleon Hill. So about 100 years ago plus, that's when they really locked these ideas in. Before that, you'd see it. I wasn't there, so allegedly you'd see it in like the traveling big top revivals, right?
Yeah.
There was a lot of like hypnosis and misdirection. And we see all that stuff. The DNA of all of those things is present now.
Right.
And here's what I've come to, for right or for wrong. At a certain level, the persuasion needs to be more, I would say, overt, like direct response copy, fear of missing out, things like that. But once it hits a certain level, it starts being self-propelling.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an interesting example, or at least I hope it's interesting. An example that interested me, let's say. I had the experience of enrolling in somebody's very, very expensive program. It was back in 2017. At that time, it was $20,000 for a year. It's $35,000 now to get into the same thing. And it is, at least it was when I saw it then, just a library of strong, proven, clever marketing strategies, right?
Yeah.
And you could just try them one after another. And what I didn't realize at the time was it was really a better fit for people who have a certain level of process established. So I just kind of jumped in. But what I noticed was, as soon as I joined it, before I had any success with it whatsoever, I did this big humble brag congratulatory post, but it was all twisted to be, well, I know this is the secret thing that I've been needing. And, I'm just so blessed and fortunate. And it took me a while. Sometimes things just stick in my craw. And I know from experience that I should explore them, right? And so I explored that. And what I realized was I was insecure about whether this would be what it promised to be or not. And as a way of soothing myself, I do this raw post for my audience. But the problem is everyone in the audience now looks and goes, oh, he's now at this level. And, you know what I mean? So there's all this like reflected glory stuff. And that's kind of what all of the things we just mentioned, the MLM world, the platform speakers, the big top revivals, the webinar gurus, like the social media people, once it hits a certain level, it becomes self-generating.
Right.
And it does that through all of those little things like, people assuaging their own concerns and insecurities by puffing up their chests and everything. The point of all that is, that's why I think it gets hard to sort of put your finger on the middle of why the persuasion and the manipulation keep persisting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think humans haven't changed a whole lot. We've just gotten better accessories.
Yep.
And so I think the soul of man, the spirit of man, the mind of man, not a whole lot has changed. There are things when it comes to persuasion, when it comes to influence, that have worked for generations. And it can be used for evil. It can be used for good. It can be, the persuasion, the influence can be used for selling snake oil, or it can be, somebody changing their life in a religious experience, but it's the same toolbox that is used, but one's used towards, somebody's self-gratification or evil or greed or whatever. Other is used to persuade them to change their life into something better than what they have.
Right. Yeah.
But I think it's the same kind of stuff, same kind of toolbox that is used, and it's the same one that's been used for generations, for eons, And so I think we can't make it all evil, and we can't make it all good. I think it is what it is, and the person wielding that tool is what makes it evil.
Right.
And what their ends are to what they're using that tool for. And so, a knife can cut bread or it can cut flesh.
Right.
It
Yeah.
depends on the intent and the holder of the knife, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's with marketing. Like we can be tainted because we've seen the dark, terrible, manipulative underside of it.
Yeah.
But I think there's also a good thing. Like if you have a solution that you provide people, you have an obligation.
Yeah.
Like you need to get out there and tell people about it. If you can help people,
Right.
if there's a certain group of people that you're able to serve and change their life through your coaching and through your products and services and what you do, you have an obligation to get that out to them. Because it's not, if you build it, they will come. That's ridiculous. If you build a website, they will come. No, they won't. And you've got to get out there. And so if you feel passionate about your message and what you're doing and the problem you solve and the kind of people you help and the transformation that they experience, you have an obligation to get out there. And you don't have to use manipulative tactics. You just have to use the tactics that get you in front of the people that you can serve best.
Yeah. Especially the example about the knife, I think is really apropos. I think of Bob Proctor famously saying electricity can cook a man's meal and also cook the man.
Right.
And it's true. For me, I had to go through a really long kind of process of parsing everything out to come to the point where it's like, marketing is agnostic in the sense that it is just a set of tools. It is a set of tools that if you master them, there's a lot of reward on the other end of it. And so naturally it attracts all kinds of people. So no, I agree with you. Where was I wanting to go from there? Well, let's just do this. It's just about an hour. And so I think that actually wraps it up. And I like that we're actually ending on a positive message whereas I was perfectly content to, end this on a downer.
Go to the dark side.
Yeah, exactly. It's always great to talk with you, my friend. And so thank you for your time here. And
this has been great.
Yeah. Would you like to do the gratuitous plug? Tell people where they can find you?
Well, you can find me everywhere at Voppa, just at and then VOPPA. That's on all socials, on my website. It's all Voppa, Voppa.com. That's where you can find me. You can also check out my podcast called Head Smack, Conversations with Misfits. And so it's about sharing great stories and aha moments that people had along the way to where they're at now. And so I've got to interview a lot of fun people that have shared their stories and just those aha moments that changed their destiny. So both of those are a great way to check me out.
Perfect. And I will say something to you now that I've never said to you before, and I'm going to say it to everybody listening. You are one of the incredibly small handful of people I would actually ask branding questions to. So
well, thank you.
Yeah. I mean, that's not a trivial thing for me either, because again, we're in a world of expertise that's a mile wide and an inch deep. Yeah. And so for you guys listening, my vote is that Paul is really knows everything about branding that you probably think you understand, but don't quite. Paul's got you there.
Thank you. Right. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. You guys tune in on the next one. Paul, it's always a pleasure, my friend. And with that, we're signing off.
Take care, man.